Happy Monday, everybody. Thanks for checking into the Traded Black podcast. I am your host, Shad Dales. Today, we've got the top cannabis attorney in the country joining us on our live stream to talk about rescheduling, safe banking. Yes, we speculate and talk a lot and a lot of hypotheticals here on the podcast every single day. But we want to hear from a legal expert, the best legal expert in the country, on where SAFE sits after last week's news. As well, does rescheduling happen? We will find that out. Let's welcome in TDR co-host Anthony Varell. Good to see you on a Monday. Back from Pinehurst. How was the golf game this weekend? Saw a lot of great pictures.
It was good. Got home about 30 minutes ago. Basically walked in the door and came straight upstairs.
Yeah.
It was good. Quick flight. Got bumped, but yeah, really good weekend. Beautiful
course
weather.
As good as they say it is.
Yeah. The U.S. Open stuff on number 2 is pretty cool.
Yeah.
They're setting up the grandstands and all the infrastructure for the U.S. Open right now. It's going to be, I think, 3 weeks.
Interesting. Well, you were busy golfing. I was downtown Detroit. Hopefully some people got a good love the videos that we posted over the weekend, but 275,000 NFL fans strong. One of the greatest events I've ever been to in my life. I cannot believe how electric it was down there, but 275,000 fans in downtown Detroit, and they did not disappoint. But I've got some good feedback. People want to see cannabis push forward, even amongst NFL fans. And I saw Pat McAfee, and I yelled to him, "What do you think of cannabis consumption?" He responded yelling, "Love it." So
does not surprise me coming from him. I think you'll get cannabis into the show sooner or later.
Yeah, probably. If you look at Dave Portnoy, it's only a matter of time. That was a lot of the questions that I asked. Listen, we're going to have managing partner of Denton's, Eric Berlin, on in just a moment. But real quick, just a couple of highlights. Consortium's coming out with their earnings in about a half an hour. What are you watching when that report comes out?
Top line, comments about the balance sheet, comments about go forward or what they're looking for going forward in the Florida market. It'll be interesting. It's an interesting earnings print. They always come out on their own on an island separated from the pack. It's a company that I've been a fan of. I think it's one of the more interesting plays in Florida.
Yep.
Outside of the big MSOs. So, I'll be jumping off of this and going right onto their conference call right after.
Yeah. Company very much attracts a lot of retail investors. Okay. Without further ado, let's, we're going to actually have Dan Ahrens on as well from MSO Mondays. Actually, Dan is actually gone. My correction.
Oh, yeah.
He's gone. He is in Washington this week. He's actually meeting up with our good friend, Don Murphy, and the crew went down there today. So he's gone today, but we're going to bring in now the managing partner of Denton's, Eric Berlin, back to the podcast. It's been probably 6 or 7 months, but good to see you a couple of weeks ago in Florida at the Benzenga conference. How are you, sir?
I am very good. It's very nice to speak with you. It was nice to see you there. I want to right up front make 2 corrections. I'm not the managing partner of Denton's. So Sonia, if you're watching it, I disclaim that.
My apologies.
No, it's all good. I am the leader of the cannabis sector group, though. I also want to dispute whether I was the best lawyer in the country, but I'll leave that alone. I appreciate it. And it's very nice to speak to both of you.
Well, listen, I know you're extremely humble, but I will say a lot of people and a lot of the well-to-do people that are well-connected within this industry all say that you are, without a doubt, the best attorney in this space, which is why we wanted to have you on and talk a lot about a lot of things. I know we like to speculate a lot, and there's a lot of people that provide comments about safe banking, rescheduling. So I wanted to address some of those things here today. So let's first begin with safe banking. News last week, Chuck Schumer talking about, quote, "We'll do our best." And we all know what we do our best means. Mitch McConnell today as well, furthering his stance on cannabis, that he does not support it whatsoever. So my question to you is, I know we talked about a lot of optimism related to rescheduling when we ran into you in Florida a couple of weeks ago, but let's first address safe banking. Based off of last week's news, does this bill pass? Does it ever pass, for that matter?
So, needless to say, my optimism on SAFER is less than on rescheduling.
Yeah.
This was always going to be challenging, and everyone knew that. And it was a situation where everything had to line up correctly, particularly in the House, with Johnson keeping his role and avoiding international catastrophes.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
one could argue whether we've done either or both, but what McConnell said is actually consistent with what he said all along.
Yep.
Which is he's not going to the extent he controls it, allow an irrelevant cannabis bill to be attached to must-pass legislation. I mean, that's the way he put it. And I know they were trying to do it for this, but he stood in the way, and it's not inconsistent with how he's acted in the past. So it narrowed that, and there are other avenues forward. But at this point, I don't know that anyone should be counting on SAFER getting passed in 2024.
Yeah.
I guess you asked whether it could in the future, and I think that it certainly could. I think it depends how politics line up in terms of who's in the White House, who's in each party is controlling each house. It's remarkable to me how many people line up or stand in the way to prevent the implementation of the rule of law here.
Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think, based on your network, why is that?
Well, I think the people who oppose this, there are people who oppose this, believe in running out the clock, right? I mean, they're hoping that everyone comes to their senses and sees what a travesty cannabis legalization has been on our cities and homes and everything else. And of course, there is no evidence of that, and that evidence hasn't emerged, and they're not going to change minds, but they're hoping that someone will come into office and put a stop to this. That's my guess. I don't know that.
Yeah. As it relates to McConnell, I mean, he was influential in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill essentially gave us intoxicating hemp products and CBD, et cetera. Do you think his opposition to SAFE is more politically motivated versus being anti-cannabis, or just a little bit of both?
So it's a great question, and I'm not inside his head, and I would. My guess is that it really is his stakeholders. I would say, rather than constituents, stakeholders who are anti-cannabis. And that's the best I can see. But I mean, again, I don't want to presume his intent, which seems to have been anti-intoxication, and he views the so-called loophole as an unfortunate mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. So let's, I guess, now that you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but this is pretty much where we are, I think, in this space right now. And a lot of people that are optimistic about rescheduling, they feel good about rescheduling. I think people are frustrated, because soon, imminent, throw those terms out the window. We just want it to happen, and it to happen like, yesterday. Where first off, again, I'll ask the straight up question. Do you think rescheduling happens before the election?
Well, I think we get I want to be careful on the language. I think that we get a notice of proposed rulemaking prior to the election. And I think, I've spoken about, and I think we've published, that the DEA could skip a proposed rule and go to final rule. There might be theoretically a way for them to do that, given the international law implications, but I don't think they're going to do that. And their spokesperson recently came out and strongly suggested notice, comment, and likely hearing. So I think that's what's likely to happen.
So we talk about rescheduling.
I'm sorry, Anthony, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, we talk about rescheduling a lot. And I mean, I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. If we were to, let's say, get that proposed ruling tomorrow, what does that process look like moving forward for comment period, the filing of lawsuits, challenging it? Like, is there actual formalities in place from like a time perspective, or is it kind of like this process is going to keep going? Lawsuit could be filed, then we're going to just keep going longer. Is there any formality to it?
You're asking, will we be done? Will your beard be as gray as mine? We're still doing this, because I think mine would be as gray as it is now. So it's a fair question. And the answer is might bum people out more than my comments on SAFER, because it could, this is a process that could happen once you get from a proposed rule to a final rule in 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
And as more time goes on, I become more and more skeptical that cannabis will fall in there because it seems to never be normal. And, you just look at this, the FTC it's gotten a lot of attention, this new rule on narrowing where non-competes can be used. And that got, as I understand, 26,000 comments.
Wow.
I mean, and that's really important and it's critical, and I could see a lot. But like cannabis is going to get a ton. And the DEA is going to have to look at them, and it goes up, to an administrative law judge for hearings, and then there's a recommendation. So I think that this is a process that could be done in 6 to 9 months. And I think it also could take substantially longer than that without even accounting for the lawsuits. And there will be lawsuits. So, this is something that the question is it possible to get it closed by the election? Yes. Okay. Is it possible this will be going on for another 2 to 3 years? Yes. That doesn't mean that there's not applicability, or I should say inapplicability of 280E during the meantime. I think I might get something litigated with the IRS, but certainly my law firm's view is that there is in fact some 280E tax relief here, regardless of exactly when they get to it.
I mean, this might be a little bit elementary of a question, but I mean, just so everybody out there can actually know or understand. So we say comment period. Like, what does that mean? Like the public, or what does that process look like? Like the public is open. It's basically an open forum for comments and concerns. And then is there a merit-based system to filter through that? Like, how do they navigate through that process?
Yeah, I'm sure they're trying. I'm sure they're now, the government is evolved in how they look at comments, and who knows, maybe they're even using some AI at this point. But to be clear, like anyone can submit a comment, right? So like when you have this process, you're going to get a ton that are not going to help them, like go weed. It's not going to be that helpful to the DEA. And so they're going to have to go through. Comments are supposed to be directed at the decision and decision-making process and supported by evidence. And particularly raise things that the DEA had not considered. And this isn't something that's sliding in under folks' radar, right? I mean, lots of folks, including my law firm, submitted comments to the DEA about where we thought, FDA, excuse me, and both, where rescheduling should end and evidence for that. And, lots of people submitted evidence. Nonetheless, you'll have many, many comments, and they'll have a heavy lift of making their way through and even getting appropriate hearings for this if they choose to go that path.
Eric, what do you think is going through the minds of the people, the DA and Milgram, like how they view this and cannabis? Like, are they being very neutral in all this? Or do you think that they're in some ways, like a lot of politicians, they really don't want to put their fingerprints on this right now?
Wow, I can't say. I just am not close enough. It'd be too speculative for me to say that, other than this, that the FDA's 252-page recommendation, I thought was very thorough. Looked like people doing their best job to look at what's actually going on and apply science. And to me, that looked like a good job done. I haven't heard anything from the DEA that, makes me think strongly that they're trying, they're affirmatively trying to legalize marijuana, or that they're going to do something radical. But what I have seen is the pushback, right? I mean, we've seen that in the letter to the Wall Street Journal, or the report in the Wall Street Journal about pushback, and the letter that emerged. And in some ways, when I looked at that, it gave me confidence that rescheduling actually is going to occur, because the arguments used are garbage. I mean, they're just not supported by the data. I quickly ran, like all of our data to rebut it and got in the press to say, these are fine arguments to make. They have the right to make them, but they should be supported by evidence. And when apparently the press asked them, like, where are you getting it? They said, oh, I read an article somewhere, and we have like pages of evidence rebutting that youth use and addiction has gone up where legalization has occurred. It's just not true. And so, these things take over. And there's a reason that article was placed, and it was placed in the Wall Street Journal, right? So you see things like that, and you know that likely there's some, I don't want to say politics, but perhaps things beyond the data that are being infused into the argument.
So this is all part of the review process. They look at rebuttals and they see if it's accurate or not. And if it's not accurate, that's basically thrown out. Like, these are some of the comments
eventually,
that they're going to receive.
Yeah, eventually for the comments, but they shouldn't be doing that now, right? I mean, they should be basing their reviews on the science. The DEA is supposed to, or are legally bound to, defer to the Health and Human Services and the FDA on scientific and medical conclusions. And so, some of this pushback that we've seen of, oh, well, this just isn't true. How could the FDA possibly conclude that cannabis is useful for appetite increase and sleep? Like, that's just not true. And of course, you actually looked at the FDA report, and it was great. I mean, a great analysis, but it ends with kind of like a blinding glimpse of the obvious for anyone who's used cannabis. Right? Yeah. And so it's a difficult uphill climb for these folks to say it's just not true and pick at the science that's used, where actually they shouldn't be doing that to begin with.
Yeah.
So we're talking, I mean, that obviously that 250-page document from the HHS was quite thorough. And I mean, that was the evidence, I guess, that we're using to validate the changing to Schedule 3 potentially. Has anyone asked for the data and evidence or science or information that was used to originally schedule it to a Schedule 1? And does that have any relevancy here?
Well, that's a difficult argument because that data, they don't exist.
Right.
And it was really based on, to the extent there was data, it was the American Medical Association saying, don't schedule this to one. This has medicinal benefits. And the government did that despite that. So there's not the data, there's not even really the data per se for the previous examinations, because they kind of skirted the issue on procedural reasons. Whereas this here, the FDA took it head on.
So, I mean, is there an argument that the original scheduling to Schedule 1 was just subjective or purely subjective and like not really?
I think there's beyond an argument. I mean, I think you look at history and there's nearly fact that it was done for incorrect political reasons as opposed to scientific and medical reasons.
Yeah.
The problem becomes, how do you undo that, right? And it's one of these, like, I don't want to say catch-22 because there is a way out and we're following it, but it had been stuck in that for such a long time because there's an actual, once you put the substance on a schedule, there is the correct legal way to remove it or move it to another schedule. And cannabis just got kind of stuck there. Well, it did. Not kind of, it got stuck there.
We're talking 50 years of a Schedule 1 drug, the perception, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing how fast it's changed in many ways. I've been doing this now for 15 years.
Yep.
And during that course of time, we now are up to 39 states with medical cannabis.
Yeah, of course.
24, the number bumps a little bit at times. But, basically, you look at the country writ large right now. When I started, my goal was safe, legal, affordable access to cannabis for those who would benefit from that. We certainly have greater legal, kind of quasi-legal, and we have greater access. Other areas are hit and miss, but it's changed a lot. It's changed a lot in people's perception and just how people are able to obtain and use cannabis. and particularly treat their own medical conditions for it, which I think is really important and liberating.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, that's 15 years out of a long period of time where illegality and the stigma had been baked in, and it just takes some time. And I think you get to the other side and it just seems obvious to you. It's like, how is this not happening? And all these things it's just the way it is, right? And that's why I don't want to get too far into suggesting that there's ill intent by someone, an official, because I think everyone at this point is, not everyone, but a lot of the people in power are doing their best. It's just a difficult situation. I do think we referred to this earlier, there are people who are just anti-legalization, and they look at safer, they look at, really any tilt toward implementing the rule of law in this area as a give to legalization. And so, listen, this is just hand-to-hand combat every day. And I know people kind of get down and they're upset about the progress, but I mean, there's been amazing progress. We have an industry that's not in great shape right now economically, but compared to what it was 10 years ago, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And all the ancillary parts and all that, and the number of real significant American businesses taking this industry seriously. And these are all amazing points of progress. And unfortunately, the legal side is taking longer than we would have anticipated.
Yeah.
But I'll say this, that Friday that the FDA's recommendation was released to the public, not the redacted version, but the full one, and good job for my colleagues in the industry who arranged that. It was pretty amazing to read that. And from where I came from, when I started, the notion that the government would finally admit that cannabis has commonly accepted or generally accepted medical uses in the United States and is not really that dangerous a drug, or doesn't really have that high risk of abuse. I mean, that's phenomenal. I mean, that's phenomenal progress in and of itself, and it can feel really frustrating. It does. I mean, I'm not saying it feels frustrating to me, the slow progress that we're making, but it is progress, and I think that's really important. And
so when this conversation started, what was it, last September? So we're talking what now? 8 months, 7 months, 8 months?
It really started. It started a year ago from then with Biden's the president's executive order. So that was, 19 months ago, right? And it just shows that things take time because that was executive order, and it was expeditiously, right? Ask the agencies to do this expeditiously. And the FDA took time, and now the DEA is taking time. And 19 months later, we still don't have even a proposed rule, but we have progress, right? And so it's, we can sort of wail at the wall or whatever, right? In the meantime, but it looks like there's progress. And as I said at the beginning of this, I still continue to believe that we're going to get a proposed rule to reschedule cannabis, and proposed rules, I should say, because there are all sorts of rules that are going to have to put in place, for example, to comply with the Single Convention on Narcotics and to keep the United States plausibly in compliance with federal law.
As per rescheduling, I mean, we've had a lot of opacity around how this is going to affect medical, how this is going to affect rec, or if it's all going to come down under one umbrella. I mean, what's your take on that? Like, is there dynamism that can be played within the schedule for the separate uses, or does it pretty much have to fall with some sort of accompanying memo with the ultimate ruling?
I'll start by saying I don't expect any bifurcation, right? I think that's what you're referring to, and what folks in the industry have said is there going to be some sort of a bifurcation, and how might that look? So let me start with this, that there is no controlled substance that has been bifurcated for the purpose for which it's being used. Other than all substances, if they're prescribed, they have to be for the prescribed medical use. But having the DEA say, oh, no, we're going to have a drug and we're going to bifurcate it is unprecedented in a sense. Other than, they kind of did it for marijuana because Marinol is a Schedule 3 drug and Epidiolex was a Schedule 5 and then removed. So I'm not saying it's unprecedented. It just would make no sense. And in the way that would be done would be unprecedented. I guess your question is, could they do this in a way where 280 would not apply? Is there some mechanics for the DEA to reschedule such that, if it's through the DEA pipeline, it's Schedule 3, and if it's outside of that, it would be Schedule 1. I don't think there are valid ways of doing that.
Okay.
Legally valid ways. Are there ways that perhaps the DEA could dream up? I imagine so, because I'm glad you were out doing stuff, man. I barely leave this floor. I just work on legalizing cannabis, and I sit and imagine like all the scenarios that it can go wrong and try to deal with them. And I'm totally joking. I'm glad you had a good time, but I'm also not joking about what I do. And so I think there are ways that could occur, but I don't see them as legally valid. And if there are folks who just want to cause delay and blah blah blah, maybe that happens, but I view that as a low probability. But
so we've had a lot of conversations about this on the show. Industry pundits, everybody's pretty much talking about rescheduling. And with what you just mentioned, is there anything that we're overseeing as part of the narrative that could potentially like glaringly railroad us or go wrong that we really hasn't come to light or we haven't seen yet?
No, I don't think so. I'm trying to think if I did know of one, whether I would say it on your podcast, honestly. I'm not trying to help the opponents, but what I have heard.
Okay, that's a good point.
What I have heard is, the pushback that I've heard from the opponents is based on international law. Can cannabis be rescheduled to Schedule 3 or really outside of Schedule 1 or 2 while we remain in compliance with international law, and specifically the Single Convention, the UN Single Convention on Narcotics.
But aren't Canada and Germany part of that treaty as well?
They are, and arguably Canada's outside of compliance, and Germany's a difficult situation. And so I would say it doesn't even matter. I mean, for Schedule 3, it easily can be scheduled. Cannabis can be scheduled under Schedule 3, and we can stay in compliance with international law. It's just a matter of implementing certain additional regulations that talk to diversion control, DEA maintaining control quotas, and that's what I anticipate happening. The second criticism is of the FDA and saying, they consider things they should not have considered. They should have considered things that they didn't, around that. And they didn't quite use the right test, even though, they say there should be a 5-part test rather than the 2-part test they use, even though the 5-part test is neither legal nor regulatory. Like, it's not binding. It was just used before, and they're using a better test now. And so those are the points of opposition that I've heard, and that I would anticipate will be in lawsuits. If cannabis is scheduled as 3, I'm anticipating those to be the feature of lawsuits, and perhaps some others, but mostly those. And just kind of like,
how valid is that rebuttal? Is it a valid one?
I don't think those are. I think those are losing arguments. I think the FDA did a good job, and it's right, and it's not a matter that cannabis is now prescribable, by the way. It's just looking at the legislated standards for rescheduling a drug and coming to the conclusion that cannabis has commonly accepted medical uses in the United States, which, most people in the country now know someone who's using it. cannabis for a medical condition, right? I mean, Americans know this
Absolutely.
by now. And that similarly, it's not as dangerous. It's not, doesn't have a high risk of abuse as heroin or even Schedule II substances like fentanyl.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I think those are fairly, you can look at, I think they did a good enough job on the data, but those who oppose that have a really uphill battle at this point because, man, I mean, from where I started 15 years ago, it's a totally different world now. I mean, truly, I think most people have someone in their family or know someone who has or is using cannabis for medical use.
Yeah.
Successfully, more successfully than what they might have been using before. And it strikes people as just inherently wrong that that is a Schedule I drug. And I think Americans are done with that. And so, you know, there may be delay though. And I want to be clear on that. I think it's a losing argument, Chad, but I think that making all those arguments and litigating them could result in delay in getting cannabis fully rescheduled.
We hear this time and time again in Washington that how do you get a politician to change their stance on a lot of this stuff? And it's a lot of the times is when they know somebody or a family member is affected by some sort of overdose when it comes to a fentanyl addiction. Like there was 100,000 people that basically overdosed last year in America alone. Has there ever been anyone? No, the answer is no. No one's ever overdosed on cannabis. And some of the conversations I had with different senators when I was in Washington a couple of weeks ago, including one that was outlining that based on the way SAFE was worded, it was like a gateway for fentanyl trafficking. And they wouldn't really elaborate off of that. But based off of that, many of the audience then starts to speculate and feels like Big Pharma is behind all this narrative of pushing forward. Do you believe that?
I don't.
No,
I don't. I mean, I don't. I believe everyone has some role along the way. But like the notion that the only thing that's holding up legalization is Big Pharma. You asked me if I believe it. I'm not saying it's wrong. I don't know, right? I don't know everything that goes on behind the scenes, but I don't have evidence of that. It's not what I see. And in fact, quite frankly, it's not based on evidence at all, right? It's not based on data. And I don't know that it's based wholly on political payments like that. Some of it's based on a deep-seated conviction that marijuana actually is dangerous, and you still have politicians that believe that. You have politicians, it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense, right? I mean, they became politicians and they said, I can't use cannabis because I want to be a politician. And it sort of feeds into itself. So going back to my days of working to legalize cannabis on the state level, all the way back to Illinois, and 14, 13, 12 years ago, this is in the early days, I showed up with binders. There were no iPads. I showed up with binders of data. I had an answer to everything. And that doesn't move folks. I already knew that. I had forgotten how to relearn it. What moves folks is when their Aunt Helen uses cannabis to deal with chemotherapy and is successful, all of a sudden cannabis is great. And you should talk to the folks who just figured this out, in the last year. They act like, they've discovered something no one else has discovered. Fine. Yeah. I'm happy for them to discover and come on over, right? It's all good. But that's actually what mostly moves folks. It's quite remarkable because we're paying them to have broader views than that. But that's what moves the politicians.
Lots to take in here. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's not what you say, but how you say it, right?
I think it's all of that, and it's whose mouth it's coming out of.
Yeah. So I think the big takeaways here is, I guess the DEA, based on the pace that they're going, are you surprised at all? Is this in line what you anticipated when the first recommendation came out in September, knowing that we're 8 months later? And to your point, timeline-wise, they can take as much time as possible as they want, correct?
Well, I mean, there's lots of history of them doing that. So, yes. In terms of timing, I think that I've said, I think DEA representatives said 6 months would be normal.
Yeah.
6 months would be kind of, it could be done quicker. but
Yeah.
6 months is an acceptable period of time. And obviously we're now past 6 months. So I guess I always thought like 6 months would be appropriate, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know if it's a medically or scientifically complicated issue, but there's just a lot on this, so that maybe it would take 8 months. And I guess we're kind of around 8 months now. So maybe that happens. Maybe some of the pushback that's made it political in a sense, and within the DEA as I understand, and otherwise through the press, delays things a little bit more.
Yeah.
But
did you see Earl Blumenauer?
8 months makes sense.
Did you see Earl Blumenauer's comments about cannabis last month? Talking about just everything in general. A lot of different senators, representatives were just not familiar with the industry at all, including DEA or not DEA, HHS. What's his name again? Anthony, who was Becerra. Sorry, my apologies. Not knowing the difference between a Schedule 1 and Schedule 5 drug, which is kind of alarming. But then Blumenauer's comments, I think in a lot of ways, and we spoke to a few people, like he put his neck on the line when he said you might want to consider looking into this if you want to attract the younger voter leading to the election, alluding to obviously the Democrat Party. But that was a bold statement. I think a lot of people in the industry were like, amen, finally somebody that's actually bringing some real evidence. But what was your, take on that sort of speech that he made at Congress, and if that definitely would help push the narrative forward at all?
Well, I think he's absolutely correct. I want to say it's a different issue than rescheduling, because I think that is there's strict legal and scientific and medical standards for that. But looking at legalization as a whole, I mean, the demographics are clear. The folks who oppose this are really old folks. And I don't mean to say all old folks, because lots of them use cannabis, but older folks, truly conservative folks, like self-identifying, like I'm a Christian conservative. Those are the folks who oppose right now, and not that many other oppose. And you look at the youth, and clearly they favor this for lots of reasons, for a whole host of reasons. I mean, this represents lots of different things to lots of different folks. Right. So from where I sit, I think that this would be good for one of the presidential candidates or one of the parties to endorse much more. And I think the Democrats are at risk of losing the issue from where I sit. I mean, I just think there are ways of going about it that might not be Democrat controlled. And that's a risk for that party and their leaders.
So if there's a recommendation basically is announced between now and the election, and they do the review period, they have the comments, regardless of what administration wins the election, do you think once we basically started that process, it'll continue through? Like, do you see, like, let's say Donald Trump gets reelected and how his views, the Republicans view cannabis as a whole. If there is a recommendation process and it's already begun, do you not think they'll see that through?
So I suppose, Shad, your question is, if Donald Trump were elected, is it possible that he would interfere with this process or put someone at as Attorney General who would basically stop it? That seems, I guess, 10 years ago, I would have said no, but now, yes, that certainly seems possible.
Wow.
Anything's possible.
A lot of moving parts.
That's
not just like possible, but it's not like, I mean, I would have thought that would be unimaginable, but that certainly seems imaginable at this point.
Oh yeah. I could, I share the same opinion as you, Eric. I could see him doing that. I like to think that he's transactional. It's not that big of a deal and he would just let it be, but I'm not putting anything past anybody.
Well, I'll tell you my concern, Anthony, is sitting right here. I mean, you didn't ask me, and I don't mean to scare your people off of it. The thing that concerns me is that cannabis and marijuana and hemp and all of it get caught up in what is clearly emerging in the political discourse as law and order. I mean, that's one of the main things that we're hearing, is that we need to get the cities back in order. And I think there's actually going to be a fairly high tolerance for that. I think you say that, and there are people who are going to vote Democrat and vote for Joe Biden who are thinking, yeah, our cities are a little, we kind of need that. And I worry a little bit that cannabis is going to get swept up in that. I don't think so. I'm not predicting the end of this industry or anything like that, and I shouldn't be misquoted for that. But I think that there are potential headwinds there. Answering your question as to what level of interference there would be, or how the hand of the government may come in and move this. I don't think that's going to happen, but it is one of the things that keeps me up at night.
Yeah,
that's what makes you a great attorney, right?
I try to get my rest, Chad, but it's I am constantly thinking of the
it's not hard to have the cannabis industry on your mind all the time. There's so many.
No, it's not.
It's very easy to become obsessed with it. I find myself just constantly thinking about all of this all the time.
The permutations, it's interesting, and in many ways we should be grateful that we get a first row seat and get to participate on it. Although, it's frustrating. And it's frustrating when you know what's right and you see the things that stand in the way.
Yeah, It's been a long road to get here, but I'm confident we'll get we'll get where we want to go. Just it's a lot of treading a lot of murky water right now.
Well, you're based in Chicago, correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. You talk about law and order in cities like that. That is probably a city that is at the forefront right now as to what's changed. But a great city to say the least, but I think there's a lot of cities that are going through some challenging times, especially since COVID right now. And that's going on 4 years.
There are cities, and I don't in any way want to minimize the mental health crisis that's behind it, the lack of affordable housing, the lack of there are all sorts of problems. I'm not here to solve them. I don't even have the capacity, but I don't think cannabis has anything to do with them, right? I mean, the notion that anyone would say we need law and order and cannabis and blah, 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 but you hear that on right-wing media. It seeps into, I chat with taxi drivers in Denver who say, do you think that the marijuana is leading the homelessness here?
It's crazy. It's like
that.
Yeah.
420 Girl just posted saying legalized 7 years in Canada. It's been 7 years legalized in Canada. And any of these stories or fears that the American, politicians are looking at or viewing as, none of this has happened in Canada. Once they legalized
but the entire premise to Schedule 1 and all of the language around it, but from the other side, it's not rooted in fact.
Right.
Whatsoever for the most part.
And my point is that now it's been legalized for 7 years. It's like you almost forget that cannabis is actually legalized. Right. It's just another thing. And I think the reason why it's just become so completely ludicrous in this day and age is the fact that it is on par with heroin. And I think we just want incremental steps. And I think that's where it just seems outrageous to think of where we still are still sitting with where cannabis is scheduled.
I encourage folks to look at the data that Health Canada has released, looking at all those years of legalization. Let's recall that Canada legalized with two precise purposes. I'm not saying they got it right or wrong, anything like that. They had two purposes: to reduce as much as possible the illicit market, and to protect kids and all that. Yeah. And when you look at the data, that actually has happened, right? I mean, they are having more and more folks purchasing cannabis from legal channels. Yeah. And Canada has not seen increased of youth usage or addiction or any of that. And so it is really important to look at that data. It's a great set of data provided to the country to help us move forward and help us figure out what is the appropriate way to go forward. And so that we approach the correct risks. And let's be clear, we're all horrible at that. Yeah. And American politics exacerbates it, right? Absolutely. And all I'm suggesting is rather than just assuming what cannabis is or isn't, let's go by the data and be steered by the tremendous amount of data we have on this now.
Yeah.
Well, I was saying the other day, I was like, Sam should go and try to argue against the American Medical Association surveys that came out last week, because their talking points are completely contrary to that. And I'm going to trust the American Medical Association and their data-backed approach on the impact of legalized cannabis with youth, et cetera, versus just their random statements that they like to make.
Right. Yep. Yeah. It's difficult because it just we're in an environment where often that goes right. I mean,
Yeah.
folks can say anything, it locks in, and it sort of becomes
Correct.
the truth. And when it's dispelled, by that time they're on to the next one.
Correct.
This has been great. Lots of feedback, to say the least. Got some people on here thinking that the real reason why it was legalized in Canada is because Trudeau wanted to get in. But, I'm not going to make this into a political podcast.
No, I'm not either.
Some truth to that.
I'm purposely not. Yeah.
He gained some popular votes. However, what you outlined were one of the main reasons, the two main reasons as to why they wanted to legalize it. But to your point, everything is showing data-wise as to it's, I don't want to say all these misconceptions that people think were going to happen within the overall society in general in Canada has not happened. And I'm sure that's probably some of the data that you share with some of the conversations that you have with people every day.
I mean, it's exactly right, Chad. Yeah, precisely correct. Yeah. And it's great talking to you guys. Thank you for the opportunity to come on here.
Yes, we got the
speak with you about these important issues. I really appreciate it.
Yes. So our good friend Rob Seacrest actually introduced you and I together 6-7 months ago. He says hi, by the way. Anyways, listen, we really appreciate your time, and hopefully this gives our viewers a little bit of better direction on just the process of rescheduling, what we can anticipate next, and just to be better prepared as to what's some of the feedback that we can hear. But we appreciate your time, Eric.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much for having me on, and I'll look forward to catching up with you guys later. Take good care.
Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Eric. Keep in touch.
Much appreciated.
I can only imagine the amount of research and thinking that man has to live every single day pertaining to this industry. But a lot of moving parts there, because as soon as we started one conversation and topic, he threw a curveball where it's like, I didn't even think about it that way, but that's the way he's got to look at it from every single angle. So hopefully our viewers, all the people out there, feel free to leave more comments, smash that like button, and feel free to share this video to your network. Again, as I've always said, we want to take this viral, continue to have these conversations. We want to have on really good thought leaders, most importantly, just to push this narrative forward. And, the next time we go to Washington, I think there's a few things that we learned here that we could probably address and bring up with some of the questions that we want to ask different politicians next time we're there. But
I just remember there's one thing I wanted to ask him, which was about the OLC opinion. We can ask him that next time.
Okay. Appreciate all the comments. Charlie Gray entered, from which I think we can glean that safer is dead and rescheduling is at best. It's not what he said, but if I was a betting person, based on a lot of the feedback and angles, I can understand completely, Charlie, as to why you're thinking that, because I have the same sentiment. But here we go, right?
Yeah.
Shad, are you able to get more celebrity coverage at all? We've actually reached out. There's a person that we met in Washington. Let me know what celebrities you're thinking, but there was one in particular we were hoping to get on last week, but there was a delay. We'll keep you posted on that. But let me know some celebrity names. Happy to reach out and get some more big name people on. But yeah, it would be great to obviously have some of these bigger name people on, just to kind of like bring up the idea where cannabis is today. It's actually a great idea. But
absolutely, all
depends on, as much as we're growing, and we are probably the premier business finance cannabis podcast currently on YouTube right now. Got to keep growing, because some of these people like Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart, I would love to have those people on. Would they give us the time? One can only ask, right?
Yeah. And Thomas, by the way, Kevin Sabat is trolling all of you with that podcast. I've got a feeling he's just putting it out there so people will get their metrics up. I highly doubt that Kevin Sabat's getting information that the people that we're speaking to that are probably closer to people within the government and within the DEA. He doesn't have access. I highly doubt he has that level of access.
Yeah. And the whole idea of us going to Washington is for you and all the community out there that's watching this right now to take you guys along with us. That's why we want to have video coverage. And that's why we continue to ask all of you for questions. Anthony, you're always good at certain questions. Like when Mitt Romney came up, you said, go up, ask him at what point does he deem cannabis as being medicine? And I thought it was a great question. It didn't get a response, but I think that's the kind of stuff that needs to be asked in the hallways. So I'm willing to go out, ask those questions. So if there's stuff that you guys want answered, or at least asked, let's bring that up and continue for us to go over to Washington time and time again to continue to push the narrative forward. But we're 50 minutes in. Good podcast to say the least. Hope Mr. Ahrens and the crew are having a good time in Washington. But we'll be back on Wednesday. And I'm trying to think if we have any guests lined up for Wednesday yet. We don't, but we'll push that out on Twitter and through the community page in the next 24 hours to give you a heads up on who we're going to be having on. But in the meantime, nice to see you back at home. Hope you had a great little weekend, and appreciate everybody for checking in. And we'll check back in with all of you again on Wednesday at 4:00.
Yep. See everybody Wednesday.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching our latest podcast. Lots of momentum building. You guys getting all excited? Leave comments below. Again, we want to take this viral. Smash that like button and make sure to click on that bell for all notifications as we start to bring on bigger and bigger guests. Don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, the Baked In newsletter, by logging on to thedalesreport.com. And we want to take this viral, as I said, and make this community grow. So make sure to subscribe on that channel because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks again, everyone, for watching.